All right, Nikki, go ahead.
All right, thank you everyone who's able to join live today, as well as for anyone that's going back to watch this later after the recording is out. I really appreciate everyone signing up today. I am excited to talk about LinkedIn. We have lots of good stuff to go over today, and then hopefully most of you caught that this is a two-part series. And so in another week, I think it's a week from today, we are doing a second session for FAQs. So the goal today is really to cover LinkedIn 101 and all of the good things about LinkedIn, give all of you a chance to work with it, kind of, go in, play around a little bit. And then on next week's session, to really dig into FAQs, roadblocks you ran into, just sort of specific questions that may help you in terms of LinkedIn. So we'll get started. I'm getting a little used to this PowerPoint on this computer, so just bear with me today if I am having some technical back and forth. So today's agenda, we're going to discuss who am I, for those of you who don't know me, and my own LinkedIn journey. I want to keep this fairly casual. I like to keep my presentations pretty real because I think it's more helpful when they are. And so we'll talk about that and why I consider myself someone who's qualified to speak on LinkedIn. I know I'm always jaded as I hear people talk. I'm like, okay, do you know what you're talking about, or are you trying to sell me something? So I'll just be pretty real about how LinkedIn's helped me professionally and how I've seen it help a lot of my clients as well. And then we'll start with how to curate a homepage that really matters for you and your goals. And I'll be doing a lot of hands-on kind of showing things today using my own LinkedIn page as an example, just because I think that type of hands-on experience is really helpful. We'll talk about engaging and why it's really important, and how following up after engagement can really help in terms of a job search or networking or growing your business or marketing and sales. And then we'll get into the important things on how to have a good profile, some tips. I'll give you some strategies there. I also have 2 guides to hand out after this call. One is just an overall one on LinkedIn, and then the second one is for using LinkedIn for networking. So I will give those to Kara, and she can send those out to everyone that signed up along with the recording of this presentation today. So I think those will be really helpful as well. And then at the end, we'll just sort of talk about going out there, trying some things, and then coming back in a week to ask any questions. I would love if any of you do have specific questions on LinkedIn to send me an email after the session so that I can compile all of those and I can try to cover those on next week's FAQ session. So it would be really helpful if you would do that. I have some common ones that I know clients ask me, and we'll also give people the opportunity to just sort of bring up their own questions and ad hoc on the spot go through them. But if we can have a few in advance, that would be helpful as well. So we'll dig in. So the first is, do I really know what I'm talking about? I mean, I think so. For what it's worth, a little bit about me, like who's Nikki? I worked in HR for, gosh, pretty much right out of college for most of my career. And when it was about 5 years ago exactly today, because my youngest had just started kindergarten and he's just going off to 5th grade today. So I remember like this time period distinctly. I was so burnt out and miserable, and I hated life, hated my job, and I really hated HR. Like I did not want to be involved in another employment lawsuit ever again for my entire life. I was bored with benefits. I was just sort of sick of being in the middle between employees and management and all the things. And so what does that have to do with LinkedIn? That's a fair question. So I decided to quit. I didn't really have a plan in place. It probably would have been a good idea to have talked to someone like a career coach first, but I just knew what I was doing wasn't working. And so I stayed home with the kids. They had just started school, with my youngest being out of daycare. That overhead had gone away. And I very quickly got bored. I am just not the type of person who does well with a lot of free time. I like structure, I like challenge, I like talking and helping people. And so that quickly led to thinking, I've got to find something to do, but I want a little more ownership over my schedule and how things go. And so a few colleagues had reached out to me to ask me to look at their resume because of my HR background. I knew a lot about recruiting and making someone look good on paper. And so that led to a quick Google search. And I'm like, this is it. I'm going to write resumes. This is the thing I can do to work around the kids' schedules. I can take off whenever I want to, have a lot of autonomy. And so I started doing that. But how does one start writing resumes, right? Because usually friends and family, for good reason, expect things for free. So when I first started doing this, it was for free. It was like, hey, does anyone want me to look at their resume? Can I make it better? I heard you're on the job search. I just would like to get some experience. And then I quickly learned I really don't know what I'm talking about like I thought I did. And so I went back for a certification to be a certified professional resume writer. And so through that, one of the first places, thanks to Dr. Google, that I realized I could grow my business was something called LinkedIn ProFinder. Now, to my knowledge right now, ProFinder is closed for new vendors, but at that time it was still sort of a new thing. And so for like $70 a month and filling out a bunch of stuff, I was able to sign up as a professional resume writer. At this point in time, I had my certification as a professional resume writer, and I had the budget to be able to swing the $70 a month. So LinkedIn would market to people that were looking for jobs to say, hey, do you want some resume help? And it would give me the ability to reach out to them, kind of, marketing my services. And so through that, I landed my first client, which seemed like the hugest deal in the entire world. I didn't think anyone would honestly ever hire me. And slowly I grew my business that way. Once I started getting some clients through ProFinder, that would reach to referrals, etc. So quickly I realized, resumes are great and they're important on the job search, but LinkedIn profiles are a huge component of folks going through the job search. And it's also a huge component of my own business. As I'm reaching out to people on ProFinder, the first thing they're doing is clicking my site to look for recommendations, to see my background, to learn more about me. And so I realized, similar to the resume writing, I knew a lot about LinkedIn. I had gone in and done a lot of trial and error, but I wanted to get more training. So that leads to a very long answer on, I went back, it was actually last summer, and I got what's called a certified digital career strategist through the same organization I did my professional writing on. Does anyone know or care? Probably not. Like, I'm sure if I was applying for a job with you, you might care, but I do just want all of you to know today, like, I did legit pay quite a bit of money to get the certificate and go through a lot of training. It was several weeks worth, and I took an exam at the end. And so I do feel like, compared to the average person, when I say I know a lot about LinkedIn, I do. One, because I started a business primarily through LinkedIn, and then two, I have a certification in it. So for what it's worth, when I'm giving examples today or talking about my opinions, it is coming from this background of my own personal experience and also my training and education as well. And I primarily built my business on here. I dabbled in Facebook, I dabbled in Instagram, it went nowhere. It just seemed like one more thing to fuss with, and I closed all of those accounts down. And right now I have just roughly over 7,100 followers, and they truly do drive business and referrals my way. It's a slow pipeline. Like, I'll have folks reach out that are like, I've been casually following you for a few years, and now finally I'm ready to make a move. So for some folks, they might drive business much more quickly through LinkedIn. A few caveats there: if you're using this today to build a business or for more of a sales or marketing perspective, it's a slow game. You have to be on there pretty often. You have to engage often, and we'll talk about that a little more later. But it definitely has worked for me. And I think that my philosophy, and when I resonate with folks, they like what they see on there, so they feel comfortable reaching out to me. And a lot of my client intake calls will say, oh, I feel like I already knew you from what you put on LinkedIn. So for what it's worth, it's been very helpful for me. I'm someone who doesn't really like social media, but I think if there was one site to be on, this one's really helpful from a professional standpoint. And I have a lot of client successes and acknowledgements with how helpful LinkedIn has been with their job search, with their networking plan, as well as from a sales and marketing perspective. I have had recruiters reach out to me saying, you know, the folks that reach out to me on here are far and few between, but I always set them a little ahead in the stack. I've had a lot of folks say my job search was going nowhere until I really started to use LinkedIn to make it pay off for me. And we'll talk about that later today on the presentation, because if you follow any career coaches, you hear a lot of this stuff, but like actually translating that into real life to make it helpful for you, we'll talk about how to do that, because I'm a skeptic just like the next person. Sometimes networking feels like a pyramid scheme where you're just like, everyone's going in a giant circle and somebody wants something from you. And so we'll talk about how LinkedIn can actually pay off for you. And so it would be helpful. I'm going to probably look at this more at the end today, but if you can share in the chat what you're hoping to get out of this and why you think LinkedIn may be helpful for you, that would be fantastic. So the first thing about LinkedIn is the homepage is really important. It's the landing platform you go on. So for what it's worth, I only check LinkedIn now on my actual laptop, or I'll check it in my phone browser. There is an app that you can use on like your iPhone or Android phone, and I highly recommend it. I just took it off because it's a time sucker for me. Like I found myself anytime I was bored or like didn't want to do something, I would just mindlessly be checking LinkedIn or using it to engage. And I would justify it because it is really helpful for my business, but it's not helpful for me as like a person or a mom when I'm like sitting there scrolling at 10 o'clock at night. And I'm just not a fan of things like that. So if you want the app, go for it, but don't feel like you have to. I continue to use it and get lots of followers and business, and I don't check it nonstop on my phone. So we really want to curate it to you. The first thing is connections. You should really start to connect to anyone and everyone that you know. All of us have a different philosophy on this. I'm here to run a business, so I'll take connection requests from anyone. I'll reach out to anyone. I'm not scared to have someone on there that I've never physically met before. If I really like their content, I'll reach out and ask them to connect. You can do that. Some people want more of a private network, and that's okay. I understand if that's where you're coming from and you want it to be more of a closely held network. There's other ways that you can track people. Like for instance, you could do follow. So for any of you here today, if you're not connected with me and you didn't want to, I certainly welcome you to, but you could also just hit follow. So that way you still see my content on your home page, but you can protect your actual first degree connections. And when we're done on this slide, I'll bring it up on my, I'll bring up my homepage. So we'll get into some more details. It's totally okay to block the haters and unconnect from the sales pitches or creeps. I get them constantly. I have so many people reaching out saying they want to redo my website that I literally just redid. So it's almost kind of offensive because I think it looks pretty good. So I will unconnect with those folks, or if they keep spamming me with sales pitches, I will just say thanks, but no thanks, like take me off your list. I, from working in HR, have some folks that I just, you know, don't really need in my orbit of space, or we all have those old bosses or just folks that were like, go away. I don't really want you in my life, block them. You can totally do that, especially if you're going to be more active on this platform. When I really started to grow my business, it was hard for me to get out of my comfort zone. I was someone from being in HR, everything was locked. Like I used to give talks to our company about why you don't want to friend clients, why you don't want to friend managers, why you need to keep your stuff private. So it was really hard for me to suddenly switch my settings to public so more people could find me. So I was careful to block the folks that I just didn't really want seeing anything. But the key is, if you are out there meeting people, if you interview for a job, if you connect with someone, always add them on here, especially after a new meeting. It's a really good way to do some follow-up and stay in touch with people. The next thing is, what are your goals? Like, obviously my goals for LinkedIn are going to be different than everyone on this call today. So you really think about, where do you want to be? Who's at the top of their game that you admire, and who is sitting somewhere that you admire? It's time to find out and stay up to date. So when I started this business, nobody had really heard of a resume writer in my life. Like I didn't know anyone that actually paid for those sort of things. I thought it was honestly a joke. Now I don't feel that way at all. I feel very passionate about the industry and the help we do for folks. It's just coming from like, I was the first in my family to graduate college. It just didn't occur to me that people could get help for things like that. And so I started searching initially just for local folks. Was there anyone around who did it? Quickly found out there was quite a few. And then I started looking on a national basis and followed like the people at the top of their game, like the ones in my field that are featured on like Forbes magazine, Inc. magazine, LinkedIn itself is featuring them on some of their content. And all of you have different folks that are at the top of your field. My husband's an attorney, so I follow a lot of attorney influencers, we'll call them, just because it helps me learn a little more about his job and his industry. So if you're in marketing, think about who are the top marketers, who are some of the people you really admire. If you have no idea where to start, I started with following a lot of podcasters, following people like authors. Greg McKeown, he wrote a book I was obsessed with called Essentialism. He's on here, he posts a lot. So you can start to just think about who you resonate with and whose like values you really appreciate. And those are some great people to follow. And then that goes into the next part, which is learning. That is really key on here. Oops, sorry. I did that a little funky on my screen so I could see it. Influencers can be amazing. A lot of times folks hear that and they're like, I don't want to follow the Kardashians on LinkedIn. And they're like, give me a break, Nikki. But I'm like, they can be really amazing. So for instance, some of these folks that I talked about being at the top of their game in my field from a career services perspective, they provide amazing content because they're out there trying to hustle, trying to sell themselves, trying to sell their company. But they provide a lot of really great free content, free ideas, free resources. So think about where you need to learn. If someone's trying to pivot industries, like for example, if you were leaving gas and going into renewables and you were an engineer, I would definitely recommend that you start following some of the game changers in the renewable energy space, because you start to learn the lingo, you start to like see where they hang out. They start to talk about some of the same books or the same conferences. And now I kind of laugh because I can be listening to a podcast and they mention someone that I'm like, oh, yep, like they say, birds of a feather flock together. You'll start to see some themes and it can be great learning content. So LinkedIn is really invaluable for your search as well as your networking efforts. We want to make your profile be really strong, and we want you to utilize the site if you're in a job search for networking. I also absolutely love it for verification of employer stories that you interview with. Does it match what they're telling you? Are they telling you they're having tremendous growth, but yet they have no other jobs posted? And have they had no other growth or really changes going on in 2 years? Or do they tell you they're the best place in the entire world to work? And then when you look on LinkedIn and search for some employees, you notice that like no one's been there longer than a year. It's a really great source of information. I call it LinkedIn stalking, but you'd be really surprised by what you can learn and validate on there. A huge one is turnover. Does it match what they're telling you? For instance, if they told you, oh, so-and-so moved on, they got a new role, but then you check and see that that person mentioned, I was laid off today, I need a new job. I'm, hopeful for anyone that can make like connections or introductions to me. Sometimes you'll see some things that look kind of shady, and don't be afraid to ask about that in an interview. It's similar to Glassdoor. It's just a really great way to get some information. But more so, where it really pays off is who do you want to meet or talk to? This is one of the things that we'll send after this call, which is the actual networking guide. LinkedIn's great. It's wonderful if you're using it. But if you're not using it to engage with folks through a direct message, through attending one of their trainings, or through asking for like a virtual or in-person coffee, it's not really going to do you any good. So it's helpful to have lots of followers like me. That's great, right? But if nobody's reaching out to me to actually ask for my services, or if you're a job seeker and you're connecting with lots of folks, but you're not actually reaching out to ask them to do an informational interview about their company or learn more about their role, you're not going as far with it as you really could be. And that's where it really pays off. You know, back in the day, you had to look this up in like a phone book, or I don't even really know how you learned information about people at companies if it was private and pretty protected. Like when I was coming out of college, there was just no way to have this sort of access. So it's really the access to information that's so important. So let's take a little quick end here, because what I want to do is bring up my own LinkedIn page, because there's just some helpful things to know on your homepage. So this is the homepage, my platform. I've curated a homepage that's very helpful to me. So how do I do that? A lot of times I'd have clients tell me, oh, Nikki, I just go on there. I don't even know what you're talking about. How am I supposed to engage with someone? Every other thing is sorry about that, a sales pitch or politics, or I'm just not interested. So here's a really helpful thing. These little 3 dots will let you be like, I don't want to see this. I'm not going to lie, most political things, I just put, I don't want to see this. Like, I don't care. I'm off Facebook for a reason. I don't want to see it. I'm on here for like personal growth, connections, networking. And I'm just like, so I will put that if something happens, and I'm like, no, that's what I go to the newspaper for. Another thing is you can unfollow. So let's say you hate my content. Like I hear a lot of times people love it. I guarantee there's equally people that hate it. And they're just like, she's obnoxious. She's like, whatever. Because there's lots of people I follow. I don't care for their content. Unfollow them. There's some folks that I have unfollowed because it just is like every other hour sunshine and roses, and it just makes me vomit. So you can stay connected, but by hitting unfollow, you don't have to see their garbage anymore. So this is what I mean, curate it to you, not to what I tell you to do or some other expert. I want you to truly go on here and be able to click on your home feed, and within 5 minutes, see things that are valuable to you, whether it's hiring managers for the positions that you're interested in, companies you're interested in, or maybe actual individuals that you're hoping to, develop a sales and marketing relationship with. You can also remove connections if they're just like super offensive, or like I have some like that where they would connect with me and then they would send me like weird kind of things. Like, I don't know if they were interested. I don't know what it was. Like, there was just like weird stuff from people outside of the US. We all get those, especially females. It's sad, but like if there was ones like that, I'd just remove them. Like, I don't need it around. So you can start to follow companies is a really good one. Influences are good. And then you just can, skim and see what's going on. I follow a lot of authors and a lot of coaches. So there's always different things going on, but this is where, if you want to engage with certain folks, make sure you do it so that they show up on your homepage. Now, for instance, if I hit right on Denise, she's someone I like her content a lot. I believe you can go to this little bell, I think it's a bell, and get notified about all of Denise's posts. So for instance, let's say there was a hiring manager that you really liked an opening they had, and you checked their LinkedIn profile and saw they're actually pretty active on here. Probably not likely to happen. It's more so probably a recruiter. Usually hiring managers, unless they're in high growth mode, are fairly busy and not always on here as much, but a lot of really good recruiters are. So if a recruiter, at example, Promega, which is a local company here in Wisconsin, if they were posting a lot of jobs and you kind of really wanted to be on their radar, you could hit this bell and it will notify you about all of their top posts, and it will actually start to put it up in your notification section, and it will help elevate it within your home feed. So you can get pretty strategic about that. For the average job seeker, I don't think this is super worth your time to obsess over, but I just think it's good to kind of know if there's people you like more than others, hit that so you see their stuff more often. And if you just can't stand it, get it out of your feed so that you're more likely to go there and check it. So I think those are kind of the key things with your homepage. So we'll go back. Now, this is the fun part, engaging. to me, LinkedIn is like a set of weights. It's only as good as the effort you put into it, and more so the effort you put into things off of it. So the guide that Kara will send you after this presentation today will walk you through exactly how to start reaching out to folks on LinkedIn. And the key is, it's not the ones you already know. A lot of times I'll hear clients say, well, gone on, I've added some of my old coworkers, gotten in touch with some people I know, but none of them are really at companies I'm interested in. And I'm like, okay, well, now we need to challenge you to either ask them to make an introduction for you to someone that is somewhere you want to be, or blindly reach out to some folks to start to develop new connections. That can be a little scary, so I'm not going to focus on that today. That's what my long 30-page guide is for, and then we can answer some of those questions based on that guide on the next session. But I just want you to keep that in mind today. I wish it was as easy as just go on, like a few things, comment on a few things, but it's not. It's still, at the end of the day, all about the human relationships and networking that you do off of this platform, or at least through specific direct messaging, Zoom coffees, things like that, that it's really going to pay off. So for instance, my business really started paying off because ProFinder put some new clients in front of me. They liked my work, they liked the prices, and they passed my name on. So that's how I started to really develop relationships and business opportunities offline from LinkedIn. It started there. And I've had a lot of clients who will blindly reach out to someone, for instance, at a company they're interested in, and say, hey, can I do an informational interview? And they'll do one, and then it may go nowhere, but then maybe 6 months later, the right position opens up and they have the right information, and they reach out again saying, hey, I just applied. Could you, put me in touch with a hiring manager or someone else to talk to? And those sort of efforts pay off to help them get a job. So there's just so much there. That's a whole other topic, but I just want all of you, I really encourage you to engage, comment, not like those things, but really start to engage in terms of putting interesting comments. If you're unsure of how to do that, start to follow the influencers, start to follow the people at the top of your field and see how they engage on there, and see how comfortable you're willing to be. When I first did it, I would just be like, great job, that's awesome, great share. And then as time went on, I started adding my own 2 cents. I would politely challenge people. I am not a fan of starting online wars or debates for the sake of getting people to notice you. There's definitely some blowhards on here that really do that. That's just not my style. And I've had a few folks kind of get nasty on some things, and I just blocked them and was like, this is just not how I do things. But I do like to put in interesting tidbits. And it's interesting, I've actually grown my followers and some of my potential clients more that way. So if you're looking at this from a sales and marketing perspective, that's where you can really start to drum up some business, because if you put some interesting things out there, or give your take or spin on things, or ask some good questions, you'd be really surprised by how many people start to like what you say, engage on there, follow you, and different things like that. So I would just say, have some fun with it and be yourself, all keeping it within obviously professional boundaries. I can be a little more open on there because I'm running a business and I don't have like an employer looking over me. If you do have an employer, I think it's still really important to be on there and be engaging, but don't be trashing them, or don't be, doing some things that would be kind of a career mistake. And those are good ones to ask on the follow-up session next week in terms of what are good or bad, because there can be some gray line there. And I can challenge you that some employers, if they're too strict, maybe is that the kind of place you want to be, or is that why you're unhappy? So again, that's a topic for another time, but just if I could challenge everyone on this call today to start to engage on there, just like, 5-10 minutes, 1 to 3 times a week, or if you're really actively looking to market and network or job search, I would challenge you 5 days a week. It really does pay off. So the profile, I think a lot of folks worry too much about their profile. It's very important to have a good profile, but it's more so important how you engage and how you interact with folks on here, because people will look at your profile and they'll check you out, especially if you use LinkedIn to apply for a job. And so after this slide, we'll go take a peek at my profile and I'll give you some tips. And then the guide that Kara will be sending all of you will walk you through how to set up a good profile as well. So a couple just high level tips. Canva is really helpful. It's a website that lets you design graphics for your background banner. That can be a great place to design your own. In full disclosure, I did mine, well, about 5 years ago when I started this business, and I just searched for it on Google Images and picked up a freebie. But for a lot of my clients, when I do design their profiles or if we're working together from a coaching perspective, we'll use Canva to design one for them. And I think if you're using this from a sales perspective, it's really important to use something like Canva to design your own to really draw people to you. And then this site next is really fun, coolsymbol.com. This is how people do the fancy fonts and emojis in social media. So whether it's Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, if you see that I have bolding, if you see that I have fun bullets that you haven't seen somewhere else, emojis, all of that sort of thing. I always wondered how people did this. And then with a quick Google search, I figured it out. I think there's a lot of other sites that do it. This is just the one I came across a few years ago and it still works for me. So I'm certainly would be happy to hear from others if they know of other ones. The about section is probably the most important. It needs to be written in first person, very, very different than a resume, which is never in first person, typically third person, but the about section should be pretty real. The more you can tell your story, where you've been, where you are, where you're hoping to go, what you're good at, what you're passionate about, and be human, the better it is. And so it's a little scary for most folks that are used to hiding a lot of this from a professional perspective. And it's all, gray. There's going to be some areas where folks get really authentic and vulnerable, and that may depend on their profession or what types of companies they're targeting versus like if you were looking to work as a CPA at a very traditional CPA firm, I'd probably give you very different advice than if you were looking to work in graphic design in New York City. It just would be very different. So that can get varies on your industry and your goals, but it still should be first person and real. Results should be mixed into your position. So we'll take a peek at mine. You want to add in some numbers similar to resume feedback. I don't want to see your job description. Nobody wants to see your job description anywhere. They want to know why Sally was really good at stocking shelves at the supermarket. Like, what did Sally do in terms of displays, or how quickly she put things together, or how much it drove sales by customers at Halloween. Like, those are the sort of things you want on a resume, and you also want those on LinkedIn. A common question I get is, well, why don't I just copy and paste right from my resume? So my kind of joke but honest answer is LinkedIn is like the first date. Like, anyone can go out to your LinkedIn profile if it's public, or if you're connected with each other on LinkedIn and see something. So you want them to learn something new on the resume. So sometimes you just pick or choose maybe one or two to put on there. Sometimes you reword some things to keep some of the numbers off. It's kind of a mix, but it is pretty similar to your resume, but you just have to kind of play around there and get creative to think about, what do I want to wow them with on the resume? Now, if you're using this from a sales and marketing perspective, results are still really important, but so is an explanation of what you do and how you can help your clients and who your ideal clients are. So you can use some of that space to really target those areas as well. It's super, super important to be careful with age bias. In general, I only like to see people go back about 10, maybe 15 years. There's some creative ways to list some of your other positions and titles and even mix in some results. So we can talk about that a little bit today. And then definitely yes to listing all the things, your education, your certifications, training courses you've taken, community efforts you've been a part of. The more the better. It's pretty easy to list those things. You just kind of play around with it. So let's take a peek at my profile. I have not, sadly, Good, didn't do it again. Good, I was worried that would lock up. I haven't updated mine probably in a little while. I try to do it, my rule of thumb for folks is try to do it ideally quarterly, but if that's not realistic, which I know I haven't done mine yet this summer, at least every 6 months. Keep it fresh, keep it updated. So you'll see on mine, I've got my free little image I took off of Google. I keep it on there because I like that it matches my shirt. In time, I do need to update this and put like Reiberg Group on and probably put my email or website and make it a little more sales oriented. But in full disclosure, I'm only really looking to work about 10 billable hours a week right now. So I am kind of in a mode where I'm not in a growth mode. I'm just looking to maintain existing clients and the occasional referrals or other work I get through contract sites. So that's why I haven't made that move. It just looks nice. And again, my goals are not high growth at the moment. When they are, that will definitely be one of the first things I switch out. A headshot's really important. And they can get pricey. I mean, there are photographers that can charge a fortune. I have resources if you need photographer recommendations from low price to high price. If you're really putting together a whole branding thing, I know lots of folks that are good at that. I have a gal based out of Australia who can take the pictures you take on your phone and put like a cool background on them and do some enhancement. And I think it's like, gosh, less than $50, and she's amazing. You can also just do it with your own phone, but you definitely want to have a good profile photo, and you need to have one. It's one of the first things I recommend to clients, because if you're out there applying or if you're out there networking and people can't see what you look like, that could potentially be something that is just a deal breaker because you don't look real. And so they don't know if you're a bot. So you definitely need to have one and keep it up to date every few years. That is one thing I'll see. People will have one and then I look and I'm like, wait, this profile is like 20 years old. If you're worried about age bias, that's where it's going to pay off more to have a good headshot than it is to use an old dated one, because they'll see through that pretty fast and that will probably annoy them or make them make some assumptions like you're not as familiar with tech or not as comfortable with certain things. And so that's just going to shoot you in the foot more. The headline's really important. This should not be your job. It usually is, because that's what LinkedIn defaults to, but you want to think about what your goals are, where you're going more so than where you are. So for me, it's pretty straightforward. It's more about the clients I'm looking for. This is tough. Like, this is one I get paid to help coach people on this, and I struggle with it. So my recommendation to folks is that's where it's really helpful to look at the thought leaders and the other folks in your space, your industry, your profession, marketing, sales, whatever it is. Look for the really like ones at the top of their field and get a feel for what their headlines are. And then another tip is search for other career coaches or resume writers or LinkedIn profile writers, and then scan down to their recommendations and look for clients that recommended their LinkedIn writing services and look at their LinkedIn profile. Then you're going to see like what the really like, there's some folks that you can see what the executive ones look like. For instance, Sarah Johnson is the name of one. She's an executive resume writer. I'll type her name in quick. Which, by the way, if you are job searching, she has a job search newsletter and it's fantastic. But if you, and see, she's got hers like really geared towards her company. If you scan down, you can see all these folks that talked about how she's great at like LinkedIn or resume writing. Take a peek at what their headlines look like and see the difference probably between what yours may look like versus someone else's, and you'll get a feel for it. So let's go back to me. I do recommend following Sarah, by the way, if you are looking for a job, because she's pretty amazing. And I love her content. I've learned a lot. So in this area, the more you can have your contact information up to date, the better. If you are someone who is job searching or wants someone to be able to find you, you need to have your email here. It gets very frustrating for recruiters if they want to get in touch with you. I understand not wanting to put your phone number on. I'm running a business, so mine is on there. I don't get as much spam as you would think. So for what it's worth, like, I haven't had anyone violate it or do anything weird with my phone number, but you definitely best ways you can passively find some opportunities. And it's pretty easy. I mean, you just hit edit and click some things. Like I have things on there just in case people ever have contract opportunities for me. And I always have my clients keep that up to date. If you are providing services, you can definitely have that on there. I have that due to LinkedIn Pro Finder, as well as having a service page on LinkedIn. Most folks don't have that, but if you are kind of going out on your own or starting your own business, that's a huge way to drum up some clients. So you have the opportunity to have featured posts up here. I want to challenge all of you to do that if you are in the job market or you do want to use this from a sales or business development perspective. This way people can see right away some samples of your work, some interesting things you've shared, more about you. It just pops out right away. And you do that by first posting. And then once you do that, you click to make it a featured post. If some of the stuff is a little over your head, just make a note of it. And I guarantee if you go back and Google it later, it's all really easy. So for what it's worth, and those are the sort of things we can cover on next week's call too, if you're like, I'm totally lost. So this is all of my activity. Definitely keep an eye on your activity, see who's checking out your profile, see what sort of people are engaging with you. Definitely am going to challenge you to put out some posts on your own. If you're uncomfortable with that, start with commenting on others, but eventually in time, I do want you to start sharing some of your own. But this about section is the one I was talking to earlier. People will check here. They're going to want to see what you're about, kind of what your story is. And this is where I want you to have a little fun and use first person I statements. It will vary by industry, by job, by goal, etc. So my tip on going back and looking at some of the other experts' profiles, check out those recommendations and check out their about sections. There's another person who I recommend following. His name is Kyle Elliott. He too is at the top of his field. He used to be more of just like a resume writer. Now he's gone back to school and just got his doctorate. And he's, I think, kind of expanded in terms of what he does, but he gives a lot of really good information here. And I would recommend you check out who's given him recommendations, because when I look at their about sections, you can almost see that there's like a certain script that he's following for his clients. And obviously they have their own certain information in there, but it's a great way to kind of learn more about how to do that on your own. So use those as like a starting point. So going back to the profile, you want to list your positions. You definitely want to have some metrics in. You can tell where I've used that website to do some formatting. I highly recommend you spend some time to format all of your stuff on LinkedIn where you're able, just because it pops to the eye and it will just really stand out compared to people that don't take the time to do that. And it literally takes like 2 seconds to copy and paste some things back and forth. It is so easy. It's just ridiculous. So have some fun with it and just don't have it too busy. Again, varies based on your field. Like if you are going into advertising, I'd say go crazy, have some fun on here and really showcase yourself. But if you're going into like CPA track, you're probably going to have something a little more conservative. So another person I highly recommend following, because he's hilarious, is Adam Karpiak, I think is how you say it. He's a recruiter and he also does resume and LinkedIn help. And he has hilarious stuff to follow. But what I really like about his profile section is you can see that instead of listing all of his past positions, he like created kind of a general one and then listed the titles. So for those of you looking to avoid age bias that are like, hey, I don't want to, because LinkedIn will require you to put your years. Unlike a resume where we can kind of finagle things or get creative, you have to put years for positions in LinkedIn. So you could think about creating a different position and listing things here. And I wouldn't even list the years. He did. But my advice to you, let's say you're a mom who's returning to the workforce and you're like, I have this great experience, but it's 20 years ago. It's like, okay, maybe we're going to list your volunteer experience or some of your leadership or community experience up here to get something more recent. But then down here, maybe we'll do something like, human resources, multiple companies. And then we get creative in this field here to talk about, like, I worked at Target, or I worked at Accenture and I did these things, and here's some accomplishments, but we don't get into your years because we can avoid some age bias that way, but still get you some credibility for what you did previously. So those are helpful too. Last couple tips to avoid age bias is down here under education. Unless you're like a year out of school and still don't have a job, take it off. If you've had so much as one internship or anything relevant to your field, take the years off. I didn't mean take education off, I meant years. Just list the university and your degrees. I would recommend keeping years on if it helps you from the perspective of, okay, that's why they don't have any job experience, they just graduated. Or if you're someone who maybe worked in engineering and now you've pivoted into project management in a totally different field, totally different industry, but you went back for like a project management degree or certification or something like that, or an MBA, for instance. If the MBA is pretty recent, then you can think about listing the year, just because you want to advertise the fact this is fresh, newer knowledge I've gained, if that's an advantage to who may be looking there. I want to see any licenses or certifications that you have. Volunteering's great. And then recommendations are key. All of you should have 5 peers, clients, former supervisors, anything you can think of. It just, that outside validation that you're awesome at what you do is really helpful, which is also a reminder to myself. I haven't asked anyone in a while and I need to get some fresher ones on here. These are about a year old. So with that, we're gonna go back to the slide. We're getting close to the end. In case any of you are like, okay, I'm hungry, I'm ready to move on to my next part of my day. So I think we went through all the things on the profile. So I'd like you just to try it and then come back to the FAQs. If you have any questions, let me know. I'd love to get some in advance of next week's presentation. And I will have a LinkedIn and networking guide emailed out to all of you. I'm super thankful for your time today. I think we actually have about 10 minutes left. So if any of you are like, I'm done, I'll be back next week, feel free to sign off. But for those of you that have some time and want to, I'd love to open it up to questions and just informal dialogue and chat. So I'm going to go ahead and let us do that so we can unmute folks and chat. So thank you so much for your time today. I hope it was helpful.
Yes, we have one question in the chat. Do you recommend investing in the LinkedIn Premium membership?
Okay, so for me, yes, because I have to for ProFinder. For clients that are hitting kind of a roadblock in terms of they can't search up enough people or they don't have enough in messages left, yes. For folks that really have no idea what their competition for positions looks like and they need to have a realistic idea of that, yes. But I'd say that's like less than 15% of the people. For most people, like 85% of you, no. See what else we have in here.
Yeah, if you
Any other questions? Yeah, throw them in the chat and then Kara can ask.
Do you recommend public LinkedIn profile?
That's a tough one. For me, yes, because otherwise it's really hard for people to find me. For the average person, if you're doing a good job of connecting with folks and things like that, probably no. If you're really on the job search and are like not having any luck or success, you might think about it. The nice thing about LinkedIn is it will give you the option on what you share on your profile. So you could think about having a public profile where the only thing that pops up is your profile picture as well as your headline. You could hide your about section, you could hide your contact info. LinkedIn itself on every single section will give you the option of like private, first degree connections, second degree connections, public, things like that. I would think about what you're comfortable with, because I also know from a security and privacy standpoint, that's not a good answer. Because there's some folks that, one, their companies won't allow them. I know folks that like work with the military, they're not even allowed to have a site or profile. And then other folks, if they're government contractors or in the finance industry. So you'll want to follow the rules of your industry and your background or goals. But, if you're using it for sales and marketing, it's super helpful if you're willing to have it public. Like, I've had a lot more folks reach out all over the country. So if you are using it to start a business or build a business, you might want to think about it, or at least, having a few key things public. Was it helpful? Did people learn something new? Good.
Hi, Nikki. This is Heather. Yes, I learned something new, and I will attest to how great you are and your services.
Thanks. I thought of you today because I am working out of a co-working space in Stoughton. I had a house vendor here and I didn't know they had co-working here, but thanks to Google, I was like, I can't work from home. I can't do this with someone there and it's loud. So yeah, I'm like right by you.
Awesome. Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Click on the chat and see if there's anything else. Good.
Another person in the chat said that they absolutely learned something new.
Good. Hopefully it's not too overwhelming. Again, when I'm using this to drive my business, you have to keep in mind my goals are different than the average job seeker. So if you're using it from a job seeking perspective, that follow-up for the informational interview or the Zoom or in-person coffee will be far more value added than how many followers you have on here. But if you are using it to start a business or from a sales and networking perspective, then it pays off in a different way for some of those long-term goals. So it just, keep that in mind. Then you may want to get a little more into the weeds. Awesome. Well, I think we're probably able to wrap up, Kara, when you're ready. Thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate it.